This webinar is about what business owners should know about PPP forgiveness. It is organized by two companies, Infiniwiz and Narrative Company. My name is Alec Pirhalo. I'm founder of Infiniwiz, which is an IT firm here in Chicago, um, also known as a outsourced IT department and so forth. Narrative Company is represented by Alex Narrat and Rochelle. Today, so Alex, Narrative Company is obviously a CPA firm, also our client and also our CPA. And so Alex and I were just talking about the other day about PPP, and we decided, why not create a webinar and inform my network and his network of clients and colleagues about this important topic. So they did some research to know the topic in depth. And so Rochelle will present it. Alex will help throughout, and Alex will also lead the Q&A at the end. Please use the Q&A button for the questions rather than the chat. Then it's easier to keep track of things. Rochelle, take it away.
Thank you for that introduction, Alec, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. We hope that after this presentation, this presentation will demystify the PPP loan forgiveness process for you. I assume you're all PPP loan borrowers. We've tried to summarize this information as much as possible because we want to leave time for questions from you at the end. And a disclaimer that this is general information. It doesn't apply to your particular facts and circumstances, but we think you'll find it informative. And here I'm going to try to share slides with you. So here we are. What business owners need to know about the PPP loan forgiveness process. I'm going to cover three areas. We'll start by addressing loan forgiveness timeline, which includes loan repayment deferral and loan forgiveness application due dates. We're going to briefly review some important concepts, including qualified expenses, covered period, and limitations and reductions to forgiveness amounts. And finally, we will describe the three separate loan forgiveness applications, only one of which you will have to complete, and the documentation requirements for each. So the loan forgiveness timeline. We're going to talk about deferrals and due dates, and note that this will vary for you based on when your loan was disbursed and the covered period that you choose. So loan payment deferral. PPP loan repayments are deferred until the earlier of 10 months after the end of your chosen covered period or the date the loan forgiveness application process is completed, and your lending institution will notify you of that first date. So let's put this into perspective. The very first PPP loan disbursed was on April 10th, 2020. Add the 8-week covered period that existed at that time, plus 10 months. So the first loan repayment would be on April 5th, 2021. So that's next calendar year. So everybody in this audience is still deferring their loan payments. If you received one of the later PPP loans, I need to point out that the 10-month deferral period will start on December 31st, 2020. That's this month at the latest. Now, if a borrower, that's you, submits a loan forgiveness application to your lender within that 10-month window, the borrower will not have to make any principal or interest payments before the date that the SBA remits the loan forgiveness to your lender. The lender must notify the borrower of the remittance by the SBA of the loan forgiven amount and the date the first payment is due in cases where there is not 100% forgiveness. Interest continues to accrue during the deferment period. To the extent that your loan is forgiven, the interest associated with it will also be forgiven. And the interest rate is 1%. Now, moving on to the loan forgiveness application due date. They will accept your loan forgiveness application up to the maturity of your loan. Most of you probably have a 5-year maturity on your loan. If you got a loan earlier, you might have a 2-year maturity, but you could probably agree with your bank to extend that to 5 years. So they're going to be accepting these forgiveness applications for a long time. You could even be making payments on your loan, then decide to submit your loan forgiveness application. Once your lender receives your application, they have 60 days to review it. Then they submit that to the SBA, and the SBA has 90 days to review it. So by submitting your loan forgiveness application, you're kind of buying you could buy an extra 5 months of loan deferrals until this is all worked out. We do want to alert you, this is for a reason to delay your loan forgiveness application. Don't submit it this month, wait till next month. Why? There is a possibility that there will be very advantageous changes made to the PPP loan forgiveness process, and these changes relate to the tax deductibility of qualified PPP expenses. The changes might not be implemented until after the end of this calendar year, and they might not be retroactive. Therefore, leave yourself open to the possibility of more favorable PPP forgiveness terms by waiting until next month. Okay, and now I just want to review some key concepts that you used when you applied for your loan, because these concepts also apply to how you calculate your forgiveness amount. Remember, only the portion of the PPP loan proceeds that were used to pay for qualified expenses are eligible for forgiveness. And the list of eligible uses of loan proceeds is fairly limited. You have your payroll and non-payroll. And your payroll consists of your salaries and wages, and also the health insurance contributions that you may make on behalf of your employees, their retirement contributions, and state payroll tax expense. The non-payroll items include mortgage interest, rent, and utilities. And I should note that these non-payroll items, these obligations, need to be enforced before February 15th, 2020. And we'll touch on that again when we talk about documentation. So in order to potentially achieve full forgiveness, you must use at least 60% of your loan proceeds on payroll. Now, originally, this ratio was 75% on payroll and 25% on non-payroll. The PPP Flexibility Act changed that. That gives you more flexibility to use your PPP loan on non-payroll expenses. However, when we get to the next slide, you'll see that many borrowers will be able to use just 100% of payroll for their loan forgiveness because of other changes. So I've already mentioned your covered payroll period a couple times in this presentation. So let's talk about what that is. The covered period was originally defined as the 8-week period beginning on the date of the loan disbursement. But as a result of the PPP Flexibility Act that was signed into law on June 5th, the covered period was extended to 24 weeks. So the borrower now has the flexibility of more time to use their proceeds and potentially entirely on payroll to make the forgiveness application process easier. So by virtue of the loan origination, borrowers received 2.5 times their 2019 average monthly payroll costs, and they now have 24 weeks to spend that. So roughly 6 months to spend 2.5 months worth of money. And this is by no means required to use all your loan proceeds on payroll costs, but it might make your application forgiveness process easier. And you'll understand that when we get to documentation. So regardless of when you received your PPP loan, your covered period cannot extend beyond December 31st of this year. So if you received your PPP loan after July 16th, you may find that you have fewer than 168 days to pay for qualified expenditures. Now, the alternate covered period it's just the same. It's just that it starts a little later. Instead of starting on the day you got the loan proceeds, it's going to start on the first payroll day after you receive the loan proceeds. And this is just helpful for you because it's easier to document. You don't have to prorate your first and last payroll. You can use whole payroll periods. So that's just helpful for you. Okay, we want to remind you of some limitations on qualified expenses and circumstances that can cause a reduction in your loan forgiveness amount. You probably remember when you applied that cash compensation eligible for forgiveness may not exceed an annual salary of $100,000 per employee and prorated for your covered period. So you could see now that the 24-week covered period is more advantageous because you're capped at $46,154 per employee, whereas if you chose the 8-week period, you have a lower limit. Now, moving on to the loan forgiveness amount might be reduced for you if you reduced your employees' wages or salaries by more than 25% compared with a base period of January 1st to March 31st, 2020. Your loan forgiveness amount will also be reduced if you decrease the number of employees that you had. And the term used here is full-time equivalent employees. And I'm not going to get any deeper into that right now, but if you reduced the number of employees that you had, there is an exemption and 2 safe harbors available that might not reduce your loan forgiveness amount. So you might still get 100% forgiveness even if you reduce the number of headcount. But there's no exemption or safe harbor if you reduced employees' wages. One more thing we want to point out to you is that if you received an EIDL loan advance, this advance will be deducted from the amount remitted to the lender upon the SBA's final decision on forgiveness. So that's not good news, but. And we've made it to the applications. There are 3 separate applications. You only have to fill out one of them. We're going to start with the easiest. These aren't named appropriately because the S is the easiest. The easy is the second easiest. So let's start with the S. Who qualifies? Borrowers who received a total PPP loan amount that was less than $50,000 and together with all their affiliates received PPP loans of less than $2 million are eligible to use this form. The great thing about this form, and it is a really great thing, is that the forgiveness calculation is exempt from any reductions due to a reduction of wage or salary or full-time equivalent employees. So that's kind of big. That makes this form very easy. It requires the least amount of documentation because you don't have any comparison periods because they don't care if you reduce something in comparison to before the pandemic or not. So that's the best one. If you don't qualify for the 3508S, let's see if you qualify for the 3508EZ. There's 3 groups of borrowers who qualify. If you're a self-employed individual, an independent contractor, or sole proprietor, and you have no employees, you can use the 3508EZ. Or if you're a borrower who did not reduce salaries or wages or full-time equivalent employee headcount, you can use the 3508EZ. And the last group are borrowers that were unable to operate during the COVID period at the same level of business activity as before February 15th, 2020, due to compliance with COVID requirements and guidance. For example, restaurants. So the 3508EZ is a good one to use, but if you don't qualify for that one either, you're going to be using the form 3508 long form. But that's just the way it goes. So let's talk about documentation for each of these before we open this up to question and answer. everyone, regardless of which form you use, you should retain all your records relating to your PPP loan for 6 years after the date the loan is forgiven or repaid in full. Now, all 3 forgiveness application forms require that you submit the following for your covered period. Now remember, the covered period is just the period that you chose that you got the loan. It doesn't include these comparison periods that I was talking about. So that makes, I'm saying that this is kind of easy. You submit the payroll reports. If you have a third-party payroll provider, they're getting very good at producing these reports for you. You'll have to gather documentation supporting the fact that you paid for employees' health insurance, retirement contributions, and state payroll tax expense, and any non-payroll expenses that you want to include, mortgage interest, rent, and utilities. And this is where I want to mention again that those obligations needed to be in effect February of 2020. So before all of this happened, they want to make sure that you already had those in place, that you didn't just create them as a way to spend these loan proceeds. And of course, you'll have to have those expenses for your covered period, those statements to show that you made those payments during the covered period. And this last documentation requirement is kind of the most complex, but if you use the 3508S form, you don't have to document this, and you don't even have to retain documentation. You're exempt from that requirement. If you fill out the 3508EZ, you just need to retain the documentation that shows that you did not reduce the number of full-time employees between January 1st, 2020 and the end of your covered period. Now, again, if you're using a third-party payroll service, they are getting pretty good at developing these reports that should make that easier for you to document. But you just have to retain them. You're not going to have to submit those to your bank. Now, if you're using the 3508 long form, you're going to show all these calculations on your form, and you're going to submit that documentation to your bank. And your comparison periods are a little different here. It's not January 1st, 2020 to the end of your covered period. You're going to submit documentation on your head count during your covered period, and then the comparison period of your choice, the one that's most beneficial to you. That could be February 15th to June 30th, 2019, or January 1st to February, that should have been February 29th, 2020. That's a typo, sorry about that. Okay, so in conclusion, you need to contact your PPP lender and complete the correct form. You're going to compile your documentation. You're not going to submit this until the new year. That was our recommendation. They say that you should continue to communicate with your lender throughout the process, and don't forget to retain your PPP documentation for 6 years. Okay, and that concludes the presentation portion of this webinar. We'll now open it up to you for questions.
So yeah, if anybody has a question, you can just chat in the box to ask the question, or use the Q&A, or just let me know in the chat, and I'll allow you to talk within the platform, so you can just speak and ask. Somebody's asking, will we be sharing this presentation? Yes, we will send the PDF slides to everybody who attended, along with the recording, if somebody likes video better. But I had some questions too. I mean, luckily I have Alex's team here to help me, being our CPA and all. But what is do you guys help with this? I mean, do you? I mean, just I guess it's not so much a question, but an FYI, right? I know that I'll just give Alex my okay, and he'll fill out all the forms and do everything for me. But okay, so we have more questions coming in. Is PPP loan considered income? I saw an article in Tribune that IRS determined it is an income.
So first of all, I want to say thank you to Rochelle for such a detailed presentation. Thank you for everybody attending our webinar. And let me address this question. So according to PPP guidelines, after a loan is forgiven, it's not considered to be income. But according to IRS regulations, if you have non-taxable income, the funds that you spend on qualified expenses will not be deductible. So basically, even though it's non-taxable revenue, but because you're not allowed to take deductions, it becomes taxable income. That's why we recommend to wait until January of 2021, see if Congress will make changes to deductibility of qualified expenses, which was their original intention, but Internal Revenue Service interpreted it differently, and that's where we are at this moment.
Go ahead.
Okay. Another
Alex,
question.
can you see those questions? Or do you need me to read them? Okay.
No, I can see them. So another question was, what would be utility expenses? It would be electric bill, gas bill, transportation expense, telephone expense, internet expense, basic service for internet. That would comprise of utility expense. Those are the categories.
Bella Reznikov is asking, your recommendation for medical office, which form out of 3 should be filled out?
What basically relates to what Rochelle went through, has nothing to do with type of business, more has to do with rules that apply. If you received more than $50,000, and probably you did, you probably would have to go with Form EZ. And in your environment, you probably retain all your workers, or they were not able to work because of COVID restrictions. You probably will qualify for that form.
Okay, and we also have some questions coming in through chat. When do you expect an answer on PPP loan? If PPP loan will be treated as income? So when do you expect to know whether it's going to be treated as income?
We don't know, but there is a conversation going through which we are aware of through Illinois CPA Society, and there is a bipartisan support on both sides of the aisle. Democrats and Republicans agree that items should be deductible. Will it go through Congress and be passed? We don't know yet, but that's why we're waiting for. We're asking you not to apply at this moment, and it might be even that you might have to file an extension on your tax returns to see if you qualify. Basically file an extension, the best case scenario, worst case scenario, you will be right on a computation under old rules, but then if expenses become deductible, it's only win-win for you. So there is no definite time frame at this moment.
Only hope.
Yeah. If you have eligible payroll costs, let's say $500K for 24 weeks, then it's I don't think this question is written. Can you see this, Alex? Can you look in the chat at 12:52? There was a question about $500K for 24 weeks.
I see that one. I think I understand what they're asking. So the only expenses that would be disqualified as deductible would be the ones that you submitted for your loan forgiveness. So the $250 in your question. So the question was, if I have 500,000 of payroll in my 24-week period, but my loan is only 250,000, which expenses would be disallowed as deductible? And it would only be the ones that were part of your loan forgiveness, so the 250.
There's more coming in for the eligible costs.
Let me get this one. There is a question if there's any talk about total forgiveness without filing any forms. I would imagine that's out of the question. That's why they created Form S, 3508S, for situations then any loans under $50,000 basically automatically forgiven. If you take a look at that form, it basically asks you for company name, address, ID number, email, phone number, amount of the loan, and amount spent on qualified expenses, and there's nothing else there. So this is your way out for loans under $50,000. Originally, there was a talk about having that for loans under $150,000, but that did not materialize. And at this moment, we didn't hear anything else on the topic. Hopefully, maybe it will be part of this discussion in Congress, just like discussion about deductibility.
And there's one question that I have to promote real quick. Gene Meltzer, being a client, asking, can he use Infiniwiz bills for phone and computers as expenses for PPP?
Okay, you would have to use it partially. So internet service that you would pay for getting internet, yes, and computer services, no.
But phones is a phone service, right?
And telephone service, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So there's another question. It's any idea how much time it will take for confirmation that loan was forgiven? Once I apply, do I still need to start making payments if decisions not been made? The answer is, so from the time you receive money, you have 24 weeks, which is called covered period. After covered period, you have another 10 months to apply. If you apply during that 10-month period, you're not making any payments of principal or interest. Also, if you apply that time period, any accrued interest will be forgiven too. If you go beyond that time frame and apply after 10 months, you have to start making payments of principal and interest. And loan could still be forgiven, but not the portion that you already paid back.
And I think once you apply, theoretically, you could be buying yourself say you apply right before your 10 months ends, then the application process starts more deferral, and it takes them time to process it. Like the bank gets 60 days to process it, the SBA gets 90 days, so that's another potential 5 months deferral.
Yes, potential, but we have already a few clients that applied and were forgiven in a shorter period of time. It's from start to finish 30 days with one client, and with another client was around 40 days. But what's interesting, both clients are not in the state of Illinois, and they dealt with smaller banks. So for some reason, smaller banks process applications faster. So another thing that nobody asked a question, but you should be aware of, larger banks like Bank of America or Chase and PNC not even started, wrong statement. They began to take some applications, but it's not open to everybody. So they invite people to apply, but not everybody can do it yet. Their websites are not working properly. And on those, with large institutions, you have to apply online. Smaller banks, like Park Ridge Community Bank or Bellman Bank, you have to apply with a manual application, which is actually very simple. You can fill it out in PDF format and submit it, and then bank employees will process it on their end and turn it over to SBA.
Okay, let's see what we haven't answered
Do we
yet.
have any more?
It's getting a little sporadic. Yeah, we have questions coming in both chat and Q&A. Are there still talks about PPP loan forgiveness across the board without completing any forms or providing documentation?
Yeah, I answered that one. Also, our friend from Texas just asked a question if there's going to be any expense that may be allowed in 2021. Are there any expectations of PPP loan changes? The only change that we're talking about would be forgiveness and deductibility part. Maybe under new administration, after inauguration, there will be a second another PPP program available, but even if that will take place, it probably will be targeted to certain industries, certain businesses like travel, entertainment, restaurants, salons. Businesses that suffered more than the other ones, so it will be more targeted. That's probably one of the things that might take place.
I'm still unclear about, Greg is asking, I'm still unclear about which date will be the measuring period for full-time employees. If we got the loan about as early as possible, what date should I be looking at to measure FTEs at the end of the loan? So let's make an example of a date. Let's say he received it on April 15. What's the period end that he should be looking at?
I can start and Alex can finish answering that one. But if you don't think that you had a headcount reduction, you need to, you can file on the 3508EZ. It just says that you need to maintain your FTE documentation from January 1st to the end of your covered period. So if you maintained your FTE, that's what you need. But if you're on the long form, you have different measurement periods that you can choose from. Alex, do you want to clarify or anything?
No, you're absolutely right, but a reduction in employees is also has to be more than 25%. So if there is a reduction of less of you have to basically go through forms and see which one you apply. But maybe the question was, when do you have time to apply? So if you received it on as was mentioned, April 15, and then you have 24 weeks in a covered period, and then you have 10 months. That was another way of answering.
Let me unmute. I don't know, Greg, if you want to speak and see if we answered it correctly to your satisfaction. I don't know. Did we understand the question properly or not? You may unmute yourself and just explain.
And the FTE is the most complex part of this. So it's a good question from Greg.
So maybe.
Yeah, I mean.
So maybe Greg can call us directly, and we will be able to answer question on one-on-one. This way, there's not going to be any missing information, because this is a more complicated question, which probably involves more information if we need to answer it correctly.
Yeah, let's do it that way. Greg has, you'll have in all of the attendees will have all of Narrative Company's information, so you can ask the questions via email later as well. No microphone. He said no microphone to respond. It's okay. I think you addressed my point, so looks like we took care of that one. Do you see anything else we haven't covered in chat or Q&A?
I just want to say one more thing to somebody who had a reduction in workforce, that there are some exemptions and safe harbors. So maybe you'll still get the 100% forgiveness.
There was another question about if only payroll could be used to substantiate qualified expenses. Yes. With a 24-week period, it makes it easier for employers to substantiate dollar amount. With payroll, and all you have to provide is the payroll reports provided to you by payroll service, or if you're using QuickBooks, you can generate the report yourself. It just has to be signed by a third party if your CPA or accounting firm that you use for payroll services. That's another issue we encountered with one of our clients that using QuickBooks for payroll, and Chase actually in this instance asked for a signed letter that was prepared by third party. So this way they know that it was a solid report, not so it was a real deal.
Alina Wexler is asking about Form 3805EZ, if it's for any amount after 50,000. It's not just the amount that counts, that determines which form should be used, because there's 3 forms. EZ is the middle form, right? The most simple form is below 50,000. Whatever is above 50,000, there's 2 different forms. One of them is EZ, but there are other conditions which you guys probably want to talk about.
So Alina, probably in your case, the Form 3508 EZ needs to be used. And if there was no reduction in employees, you should be fine with using that particular form. Anybody, any other?
I have a question. If, let's say, I was doing this forgiveness myself without your help, I mean, guidelines provide information about what documents, supporting documents they'll need, but they're not very clear. They're saying, what's the wording they use? Retain documentation to prove, or provide documentation to prove that you have FTEs. But what is legitimate documentation? What if I don't use a third-party company and I just use Intuit Payroll, and you know, that's how the payroll is done? What's considered to be legitimate documentation?
So if your Form 941 payroll tax, quarterly payroll tax report is signed by a third party, like a CPA, that would be acceptable. We already had that situation, and bank accept that form. So in many instances, it could be different from bank to bank. It's all about their comfort level. Bigger banks maybe have more restrictive rules and more check marks. You need to jump through more hoops. But at the same time, bigger banks will have a website where you answer questions related how you spend money, what you spend money on, and they will lead you to the proper form. But go back to your question, if your 941 is signed by a CPA, that would be acceptable as a third party.
Okay, I think we covered all the questions pretty much. Just FYI, everybody, we will be sending the recording of this webinar, as well as all slides of the presentation, to everybody who attended. Again, my name is Alec. I'm co-founder of Infiniwiz, local IT firm, and I'm with Narrett & Company, represented by Alex Narrett, the founder, and Rochelle Plant, the accounting and tax specialist. At this point, I want to say goodbye and thank you for coming over. We will be doing more webinars on other important topics, so keep an eye on your inbox, and thanks again.